Don Mazzella here again for Small Business Digest. We have with us William Stern. I gather from what I've seen in the press, he's creating a kind of an exciting company in Cardiff. And he'll tell us more about it. But first, we welcome him to the program and ask him the first question. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Will.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on, Don. I appreciate it. So a little bit about myself. So I was born and raised in San Diego. I went to college in San Diego and ended up moving from Orange County all the way up to San Francisco to work for Fisher Investments. I don't know if you know Ken Fisher. He's always featured on CNBC and high net worth private client money manager. But anyway, learned a lot from him and then decided at 24 years of age, pretty early on, that I would start my own company. And so moved back down to San Diego. And here we are almost 22 years later. In April, Cardiff will celebrate its 22-year anniversary. And so I think at the close of this year, we're targeting $12 billion in funding to Main Street. So pretty critical milestone.
But let's stop a minute. What you're really good at is providing financing for small business. Am I correct?
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly what we do.
Okay, we're going to cover a lot, but my next question is, what's your website?
It's www.cardiff.co. So that's CARDIFF.co.
I always ask this question. Where did you come up with the name?
Yeah, it's a great question. When Cardiff first started out, we were a one SKU company, meaning we had one product. That was equipment financing, equipment leasing. So if you think of a traditional small to medium sized business, they're leasing equipment like forklifts and trucks and trailers. Well, the first laws of equipment leasing or leasing in general started in Cardiff, which is the capital of Wales in the UK.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Well, let's back up another minute and ask a question that in all of our research, small businesses ask, what's the advantage of leasing rather than buying?
Yeah, I mean, for small businesses out there trying to contemplate whether or not they should lease or buy, I think there are a few sort of mental gymnastics I think that you're going to want to take into consideration before making the purchase. Now, one thing is right, can the business afford the cash outlay up front? That's probably the largest consideration, right? If a business is wondering whether they should, purchase outright or lease, it's the capital outlay. Can they afford to bleed the company of all of its cash and put it into an asset that really and truly starts depreciating day one? It's like going to the automobile dealership and buying a new car for your wife. And then as soon as you drive it off the lot, right, 20%, right out the door. So the cash outlay part is definitely a large consideration. Now, with leasing, especially with a true operating lease, you don't own the asset, right? You're leasing the asset. And so what you're ending up doing is you're just paying off the depreciation of the asset, right? So the government allows the asset to be depreciated over time. And essentially that's what you're doing. You're depreciating. And because you don't own it, there are tax laws that benefit business owners. So essentially you write off, right? You deduct that whole payment, right, from pre-tax revenue. And so it just allows you to leverage what the asset can do, right? If it's a forklift, it's picking up stuff and moving it, right, around your factory floor or your warehouse and put it on a truck. But not having to worry about that, whether or not that asset's going to depreciate over time, the capital outlay. Generally speaking, leases come with, great sort of warranty packages in cases if it breaks, right? Something should go wrong with the asset. Since you don't own it, right? Somebody else has to handle the upkeep. Same with like a Xerox machine, right? In your office. So those are some considerations, right? The tax considerations, the capital outlay consideration. And also, right? Will the asset, right, go the way of the buffalo? Right? What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is you buy something, it's like an iPhone, right? I've got the newest iPhone right here. Well, what's this thing going to be worth in a year or 2 years or 3 years? Well, nothing. Technology moves so fast. And so if you're worrying about the asset becoming outdated, antiquated, leasing is a great way to hedge that bet. So
Bill, let's keep talking a little bit about leasing because it is a topic, and after healthcare, it is one of the top topics in our focus groups that we find. Um, but what are you doing now, and what are the products that people are leasing today?
well, I would say that, Cardiff has a pretty diversified client base. And I always say that, if one customer takes up more than 20% of your revenue, that's a customer concentration issue, right? That's a danger, right? And I learned that early on in corporate finance. I would say that Cardiff does maintain, as best we can, right, through our marketing, down the funnel to our credit processing, and then all the way to our funding. We try our best to keep a diversified portfolio. Obviously, it's to keep the bankers happy, right? It's, the bean counters happy. But I mean, logically, it also makes sense, right? So if you were to stand back and look at kind of the composition of the mosaic, there's restaurants and lodging, right? Hotels. There's transportation, right? Which is like, trucks and trailers, delivery vans, right? The last mile type delivery, right? The stuff that your local Amazon guys are running over to your house. And then you've got healthcare, like you were just mentioning, medical, dental, huge component of our portfolio. And then contractors is a pretty big concentration, right? And what do I mean by contractors? I don't mean, large publicly traded, right, electrical contractors or construction companies. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about blue collar America, right? So the guys that are turning wrenches, that are, hammering nails into drywall, that are, running a paver and smoothing concrete, and those are the types of businesses that we fund in the construction trades. And to sort of close the loop on your question, what are they financing or what are they leasing? Right? They finance and lease everything. But that's just one SKU, right? That's one product SKU of Cardiff, right? The biggest SKUs that we have, right, are, business lines of credit and term loans, right? So those are probably the most popular, right, sort of products that we have. And it makes sense because with equipment leasing, you got to be ready with, you have to have a product in mind that you want to purchase. And then you got to go out and you got to get a quote or you got to get an invoice. All right. So you have to look at the piece of equipment and touch it and feel it and make sure it's right and compare it against its ilk. And then once you've sort of narrowed it down to, that's the one I want. All right, now you're ready to purchase. That could take 90 days. So for us, while we do offer that product, right, the fastest product, right, we talk about like, the funding, sort of approval in minutes and funding same day, right? So if you're a business owner and you're looking for access to capital today, we'll come to Cardiff, right? Apply in minutes, get funding same day, versus equipment leasing where it's show us the invoice, show us the quote, our asset protection department will underwrite the transaction and, see if the asset holds water and, so on and so forth. And then 5 days later, you've got a set of documents that you can execute. I would say if you're a business owner, regardless of whether or not you want to end up leasing or financing a piece of equipment, get a term loan, get a business line of credit, make the purchase, and then after the fact, hand it over to your accounting department, call us back and say, hey, we want to pivot, put this into an equipment lease to take advantage of the the tax incentives. And so, all the industries that I've described, just imagine, right? Walk-in cooler, walk-in freezer, bar, AV equipment, point of sale, landscaping equipment, floor scrubbers, floor polishers, all of that type of stuff, right? Trucks and trailers and everything in between ends up getting finance.
Well, let's talk about it for a second. What do you look for in a company when they come to you and say, I need $40,000 in business, as a
Yeah.
business loan?
Yeah. I think, we try to be as sort of open-minded as we can, right? Cardiff's whole philosophy is we want to democratize access to capital for small businesses. And so what that means, right? Democracy, right? What that means is giving everybody equal access. And since the 2008 financial crisis, I think the majority of small business owners felt locked out, right? So, the real estate market got everybody, America sneezes and the world catches a cold, right? So financial crisis, it wasn't just domestic, right? It affected, governments in Finland that bought bonds. I mean, it affected everyone. And so they had to right the wrong, and they had to legislate so that this didn't happen again. Right. I think the Federal Reserve governor at the time said it's irrational exuberance, Alan Greenspan. Right. It was irrational exuberance. You could get, a mortgage for super cheap, and people were doing interest only mortgage. It just made no sense. Like, you've got a great financial product in front of you. Why are you not taking it? Why are you taking a riskier one that bets on the upside of home values? Well, in any event, we know how that turned out. And so for us, right, going back to democratizing access, then they ended up legislating their way out of these sort of, turbulent times with the Dodd-Frank Act, which basically said, amongst other things, that banks had to keep a bunch of cash on hand. So lending to small businesses is risky. Why? Because not tied to a building or land. Those are two, it's an inconvenient truth, right? Like, you want us to lend to small businesses, but they don't have assets that can stand the test of time. Everything depreciates. Well, land and buildings, right? Though they have depreciation schedules, we're talking 30 years, right? Versus a forklift that accelerates, with regard to depreciation. I'm getting very technical right now. Hope I'm not losing anybody. But so going back to the, democratizing access, we realized that we needed to have a credit window, right, this big, versus most banks having a credit window that big, right? Because no longer can you walk into a bank, extend a handshake with your local banker, fill out an application, and walk out with a briefcase of $50,000. Doesn't work like that anymore. So no, but it used to. You used to be able to. I remember talking to my granddad, and he would say, when I needed a loan for my business, I could walk into my local branch, I could speak to my banker, sit down, tell him what I'm trying to accomplish, and then he would say, yeah, let's do it. That doesn't exist today.
No.
Right? Your local banker is a 22-year-old kid that hopefully graduated high school, hopefully speaks English, doesn't know anything about business, right? Went to a training class to count money maybe for 2 weeks, and now with a suit and tie from Men's Warehouse, right, wants to talk business with you. No, he wants to get you out of his bank, unless what? Unless you're making a deposit.
Yes.
Yeah, or you're opening a credit card or something, some way where they could make interest off of you, right?
But let's talk about Cardiff for a minute. But do you take into account the individual when you look at a loan?
Yeah, so that's what I was sort of getting to, right? We look at the composition of the company, and so there's 88 data points that we're looking at when we're underwriting a business. I think that's the current number. So essentially what people do, right? We're the largest advertiser of commercial loan products, right, on the internet. So it doesn't matter if you're on Facebook or Instagram, TikTok, Reddit, right? Google, YouTube, no matter where you go, right? We're there. That's achieving omnipresence. We're also in the mail stream, sending out over 1.5 million pieces of mail a month to small businesses, right? And so that's the level of dedication. And how are we doing this? Well, we're trying to target small businesses really under 10 million in revenue. And so we're using all these key data points when we're processing the application. And we're, I don't want to give away, Rao's recipe of marinara sauce, right? But drives everybody crazy, right? But I will say what we weigh heavily are two things: how long you've been in business, right? Right. We'll look at someone if they've only been in business 6 months. Right? We'd rather have people been in business 6 years, but we will consider a business with 6 months time of business. The other thing is just cash flow, meaning like, all right, well, you start the month with X. Are you ending it on a better note or a worse note? Well, if consistently you end the month with a positive number, for us, that means you've sort of balanced your business, right? You got debits and credits, right? Everything else is bullshit, right?
Yes.
The flare ups with employees, the vendors aren't delivering, the suppliers are late, your partners are angry at you. None of it matters. I don't want to hear it, right? We process 100,000 applications a month. Nobody wants to hear stories. You fill out an application, you've got time in business of 6 months or greater, and more than $20,000 in revenue a month, you get a loan. It doesn't mean you get a loan for $500,000, but we'll offer you something consistent with what you can pay back. And the coolest part is we're not transactional, meaning that this is a relationship. And so we hope, right, as your business sort of ameliorates, heals, and gets better and matures and grows, we're going to offer you more access to capital. And we're going to offer that capital at a better rate. So,
But then let's go to the other side of it. How do you identify when a company is starting to uh, go under?
it's a great question. It's a great question. Don't get in the lending business. That's what I can say. um, you know, with modern technology, you have greater transparency with understanding the health of a business than you used to. Businesses used to be able to hide, right, the narrative, right, what's going on with the health of their business. You would always wonder, right, as a banker, is the business salubrious or not, right? And so sometimes with businesses, especially businesses that have a banking relationship, um, you'd submit financials, quarterly financials to the bank. And then the banker reviews the financials, and they're financial analysts or whatever. They're reviewing the numbers, they're spreading the numbers, balance sheet, P&L, interim statements. They're looking at everything, trying to make a decision. Well, what's the trajectory? What's the arc of the business? Are things getting better or not? But as you well know, when you're submitting financials on a quarterly basis and they're internally prepared, right? It's not like they're audited by an accounting department. There is a propensity for people to, proverbially, right, fudge the numbers, right? And so thank God for technology, right? In some ways, right? Technology brings us all closer together. That's the good part. Now, there's all sorts of downsides with technology, right? Keep your kids off social media. That's not positive and that's not good for their mental health. But today we're communicating over Zoom. I'm in California. I know you're on the East Coast, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So technology is a great thing when used properly. Well, one such piece of technology that Cardiff leverages is a platform called Plaid, Plaid. And so for your listeners, if they've ever used an app called Venmo, right? If you've ever heard of that, where you connect your bank account to Venmo, Plaid is that bridge. Plaid is that bridge that sort of effortlessly connects the two. And so in the same way that, we're doing a Zoom today that connects us, Plaid connects us, with respect to financials. And so it's a clean, frictionless, transparent way for us to understand on a live basis the health of a business.
Hmm.
And so essentially it connects like when the applicant applies for financing, it asks them, do you want to connect to Plaid? Because we don't accept paper. Remember the old days? I'll fax it to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't do that. And then it was like, well, I'll send you the PDF. I'll download it from my bank. And then we realized that people could use what's called Adobe Photoshop and, turn that negative number to a positive number. So we couldn't deal with the fraud, right? You're asking a great question about like the downside protection, if you will. And so the best way that we felt that we could fight fraud is with technology. And so Plaid is a great way. It's sort of a gateway to their bank. It gives us read-only access, right? Not, we can't do anything apart from just look at the numbers. And so every once in a while with that technology, right, our system logs in and looks at the health of the business and helps us determine if we want to make a new offer to the business or even refinance their current debt to a lower rate. Because it behooves us, especially in an environment where the government is buying bonds and lowering rates, right, to create more liquidity, right, in the marketplace. Well, if they're creating more liquidity in the market, that means our cost of capital has also gone down. So in order for us to be more competitive, right, we want to lower rates to make the effective rate to the customer that much more attractive.
Your website again for our audience?
That's right. It's www.cardiff.co.
Okay. And someone wanted to just to talk to you or to somebody. Do you have an email or anything?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Like for PR, right? If people want to talk to me, they can go to www.joinwilliam.com. So apart from running Cardiff, I also have, an executive and corporate sort of entrepreneur coaching program. It's called The Fraternity. Yeah. You can go to jointhefraternity.com. It's essentially, right, it's an ecosystem of small business owners scattered across the world, not just in the US. And we get together over Zoom, right, twice a month on Thursdays at 4 p.m. Pacific time, with a defined sort of curriculum for each month. We were in the 90-day revenue challenge, which was an amazing program, teaching business owners about important lessons like cross-sell and upsell and bundling and digital marketing. And so, it's a great organization. So if you're looking to contact me personally about gaining entry there, that's jointhefraternity.com. For PR, it's joinwilliam.com. And if somebody's looking for access to capital, of course, I've given the website. But you can also, I'm sure you can contact us via Instagram or Facebook, by phone, by email, right? Just go to the website. You can get all the details.
What do you, going back, you're sitting there, what are some of the reasons companies fail, smaller companies fail that you've run across?
Listen, I've been in the business for 26 years now, right? I started in 2001, 25 years. And businesses go the way of the buffalo for many reasons. And I'll tell you a funny sort of story. And I always ask people this, especially when I'm on stage. I think it's a funny way to interact with the crowd. I want you to guess, what was the largest company in America at the turn of the 20th century? So going from the 1800s to the 1900s. What do you think the largest company in America was?
I would have thought the U.S. Steel is one of the steel guys.
That is the answer, but it's wrong. And it's wild to think that U.S. Steel wasn't the largest, right? That it wasn't steel or locomotives, right? And it wasn't, right? The largest business in America at the turn of the 20th century was the American Saddle Company. I don't know who the American Saddle Company. I don't own a saddle. But at the turn of the century, everyone owned saddles. Why? Because horses were the main method of transportation. Why are the brownstones in New York, right? Why are there steps up to every brownstone? Because the smell and the dung on the street, right? They didn't want to have to deal with that. So they're elevated 10 steps up. American Saddle. So, yeah, it's an interesting piece of, sort of history. And it's a good anecdote for small business owners. Most small business owners are masters of their trade, right? They're they're plumbers, they're electricians, they're drywall guys, they're product experts. They're not necessarily business owners, entrepreneurs, right? They're what I would call self-employed, right? So as the business grows, they work more and they earn more. But there's a difference between businesses growing versus businesses scaling. And I don't want to get into this long diatribe on what's the difference, but what I will say is blind spots. Blind spots. You ask me, why do businesses sort of go out of business, go the way of the buffalo? The American Saddle Company is the greatest example I can think of, failing to acknowledge that, hey, there's this thing called the automobile. Maybe we should think to diversify, right? They had the capital, right? They had, what's that?
No, keep going.
Oh, okay. Sorry. American Saddle Company certainly had the capital. They could invest in the automobile and they chose not to. So it's, to give you sort of the reasons why businesses go out of business, it's foresight, it's the ability to see around corners and blind spots. It's greed. And I think in sort of that, sort of expanding upon that theme of greed, most businesses run their business like a lifestyle business and not like an enterprise, meaning that they dip into the proverbial piggy bank to finance their lifestyle. And as their business grows and as their income grows, so grows their lifestyle. And that's the danger. It's that hedonic treadmill that you can never get off of that, really is this false idol in America, which is consumerism, right? I need more, I need more, I need more, I need more, but you're never, satiated.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's a problem, right? Because it is a false idol, right? And I tell business owners all the time, in the sort of exchange of human interaction, the most valuable asset that can be traded amongst humans is time. It's not love, right? It's not, there's so many ways that you trade between humans. Certainly not money, but it's time. Why? Because time you can give and never get back. And that makes it the most valuable asset, right? So for most business owners, right, blind spot, see around corners, look at what your competitors are doing. Don't ignore technology and AI in your business, right? Be cautious of your costs, right? Give employees more responsibilities, not less, right? Let AI run sort of, sidecar, if you will, to help that employee be more productive. And I'll tell you a quick story before we end things. You open up a history book today and you look at what it was like in the Industrial Revolution, let's say in the 1850s in America, right? And you look at like what New York City looked like, whatever, Bronx, doesn't matter the borough. You've got manufacturing in a big warehouse, right? And this is sort of pre-union, right, if you will, right? Samuel Gompers and all that. And so you've got people sewing something, right? And they're doing it all day, right? With no air and dim lighting, and their backs are hurting, right? And we're looking at people now pictured from those times going, look at those work conditions. Well, I promise you, in 150 years from now, people will look back at us looking like monkeys at a keyboard and going, that was their work condition?
Mm-hmm.
That's how they made a living? This is terrible.
You're absolutely right.
So the lesson is, right, like do more with less, create more freedom for yourself as a business owner. And remember, that's why you went into business. It wasn't to have a name tag that said owner. It was to have the freedom to decide how you want to spend your time, right, with your family. That's the reason. That's freedom. So
absolutely.
that's my message today.
One last time, your website?
www.cardiff.co.
Well, Bill, it's been a very enjoyable time together. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate you.